The heart monitor flatlined at 3:47 inches the morning, and nobody in that hospital ran. Nobody screamed. Nobody even looked up from their charts, because in Ward 7 of Somerset Medical Center, patients died all the time, and that was simply the nature of the place, the nature of the work, the nature of the man who walked those halls every single night with a needle in his pocket and something ancient and wrong living quietly behind his eyes. His name was Charles Cullen. He was a nurse. He had soft hands and a gentle voice, and he knew exactly how much digoxin it takes to stop a human heart without leaving a single mark that anyone would notice. For 16 years across 10 hospitals in 2 states, he walked the night shifts, and the official body count stands at 29. But the investigators who dug deepest into this case believe the real number could be as high as 400. 400 human beings who walked into a hospital, trusting the person at their bedside, and instead found Charles Cullen standing over them in the dark. And the most terrifying part of this story is not what he did. It is who let him do it. John Shanager was 67 years old when he was admitted to Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, in the summer of 1992. He had a daughter named Amy, who called him every Sunday morning without fail. He had a garden where he grew tomatoes he gave to his neighbors whether they wanted them or not. He had a laugh that came from somewhere deep in his stomach and filled up whatever room he was standing in. He had a wife named Linda, who still held his hand when they watched television after 40 years of marriage. He was admitted for a manageable cardiac condition. His doctors told the family he would be home within the week. He was, by every reasonable medical expectation, going to be absolutely fine. Charles Cullen was assigned to his care. The room John was in had that particular hospital smell, that antiseptic cold that gets into your sinuses and reminds you that you are in a place designed to hold illness at a distance. The hallway outside made sounds at night, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the distant hiss of equipment, voices that never quite resolved into words. Linda brought him a crossword puzzle book and a thermos of coffee. She smuggled past the nurse's station because she knew he hated hospital coffee, and she wanted him to feel at home, even in a place that felt nothing like home. She kissed him goodnight on a Tuesday. He was dead by Wednesday morning. Cause of death listed as cardiac complications. No investigation, no second look. Just a body and a certificate, and a family left holding a grief they believed was ordinary when it was anything but ordinary. Because in John Shanager's room the night he died, his IV bag had been injected with a lethal dose of digoxin that his body had no chance of surviving. Nobody knew that yet. Nobody would know it for years. Charles Cullen drove home through the gray New Jersey dawn, walked into his house, and slept without feeling a single thing wrong about what he had done. He was born in 1960, the youngest of 8 children. His father died before Charles turned a year old. His mother died in a car accident when he was 18. By the time he enrolled in nursing school, he had already attempted suicide multiple times and accumulated a history of psychiatric hospitalizations that stretched back years. He was evaluated, medicated, discharged, forgotten, evaluated again, and eventually handed a nursing license by a system that did not look too hard at what it was creating. His first hospital flagged medication irregularities on his ward within 2 years. Patients on his shift were dying at a rate that made administrators uncomfortable when they looked at the numbers too long. He resigned before the investigation concluded. He was not reported to the state nursing board. He was not investigated by police. He simply left and carried his license to the next hospital and started again. And then the next hospital, and the one after that. Every single time the same pattern repeated itself. Unusual deaths. Medication records that did not match physician orders. Internal investigations opened and quietly closed. Employment terminated without explanation. No report to the state licensing board, no call to law enforcement. The next hospital would call for a reference and receive something deliberately vague because speaking the truth plainly was a defamation lawsuit, and silence was free, and the legal department had made the calculation, and the calculation did not include the people in the beds. In 1998, a nurse at Lehigh Valley Hospital named Sarah Rigel began to feel something she would later describe as a feeling before it became a fact. She noticed that patients on Cullen's night shifts were not progressing the way they should. She noticed medication access logs that made no clinical sense. She brought it to her supervisor. The supervisor listened carefully and nodded and filed a report that went into a drawer and stayed there. Sarah Rigel was transferred to a different ward. Charles Cullen continued his shifts. If someone had listened to Sarah Rigel in 1998, the patients who died after 1998 might still be alive. There is no comfortable way to say that, so it is simply said plainly and left to sit. Jin Kyung Han was 40 years old when she was admitted to Somerset Medical Center in June of 2003. She had come to America from South Korea as a young woman and built a life in New Jersey through extraordinary effort and a warmth that her colleagues described as the kind that made you feel like the most important person in the room when she was talking to you. She had a son who was 7 years old. She was admitted for an acute illness her doctors fully expected her to survive. She died of acute digoxin toxicity. Her son grew up without her. He is in his 20s now, somewhere in New Jersey, carrying the shape of a loss and a question underneath it that nobody answered for years. The investigation that finally caught Charles Cullen began not because a hospital raised an alarm, but because a pharmacy flagged something unusual. The automated medication dispensing system at Somerset Medical Center showed Cullen accessing medications and returning them unused in a pattern that made no medical sense but had a precise and terrifying explanation. He was learning the system, finding the gaps where no one looked. The Somerset County Prosecutor's Office opened an investigation in the fall of 2003, and detectives Danny Baldwin and Tim Braun walked into what was not a standard murder investigation but an archaeological dig through $16, years of medical records across 2 states. A nurse named Amy Ridgway agreed to wear a wire. She sat across from Charles Cullen in the hospital break room and made ordinary conversation while carrying the knowledge of what he might be. The recordings captured a man who was calm and reasonable and cooperative in a way that felt like a performance of cooperation rather than the genuine article. He made tea, he helped with cases. He was, by every visible measure, a good colleague. Underneath the surface of every recorded word, the detectives listened for the fracture that would give them legal standing to move. On the 12th of December, 2003, Charles Cullen was arrested in a parking lot in Warren County, New Jersey. He was on his way to lunch. He did not run. He sat in the back of the police car and looked out at the gray winter sky and said almost nothing. He began to confess within days, not because the evidence was overwhelming, though it was growing, but because he had spent 16 years carrying something entirely alone, and the weight of that solitary secret had become its own unbearable thing. He described the rooms. He described the silence of the wards at 3 a.m. He described the IV bags and the needles, and the particular stillness of a patient sleeping and trusting. He described it all with a calm that made the detectives' hands shake when they read the transcripts back. He pled guilty. He was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences. He will die in prison. But here's where this story becomes something no sentence can contain. The 29 murders he confessed to are almost certainly not the full count. Investigators working backward through the hospitals, through the death certificates, through the medication records of every patient who died on his shifts arrived at a number that exists not as a confirmed fact, but as a devastating probability. The upper estimate given by investigators is 400. Charles Cullen himself, when pressed on the total, said he did not remember how many. He said he had not kept track. He had not kept track. Those missing victims have no justice. Their families do not know. Their death certificates say cardiac event and heart failure and natural causes, and those certificates are filed in county records offices, and nobody is going to open them and change what they say because the evidence is too old, and the system that was supposed to protect them has spent 2 decades trying not to look too directly at what it failed to do. The hospitals paid settlements, signed non-disclosure agreements, returned to business. The administrators who transferred Cullen without reporting him are retired or still working in healthcare administration, and none of them are in a cell. Amy Ridgway left nursing after the case. She has said she cannot separate the memory of hospital corridors from the memory of what happened in them. Sarah Rigel still carries what it means to have been right about something terrible and not been heard. Linda Shanager has lived for more than 30 years with the knowledge that her husband's death was not what she was told it was, and that someone made the calculation that protecting the institution was worth more than telling her the truth. Somewhere tonight there is a family visiting a grave and believing what they were told. Somewhere there is a son or a daughter who feels the particular mystery of a loss that seemed too sudden and too wrong, and has no way to name what they are feeling, because nobody has ever given them the information that would let them name. Is it? Those families are out there right now, and they deserve to know. A monster with a name and a cell number is a monster you can point at. A system of institutional silence and legal calculation applied to human life is a monster that wears the face of normal procedure, and it was walking these halls before Charles Cullen was born, and it will be walking them long after his name is forgotten. Ask yourself tonight in the quiet of wherever you are, how many Charles Cullens are working right now in hospitals you have never heard of, in wards where the night shift is silent and the medication logs are checked by no one, standing over someone who is sleeping and trusting and has no idea that the system meant to protect them already looked at the evidence once and chose to look away. How many of those reports are sitting in a drawer right now in the dark waiting for someone with the courage to open it? This is Crime Crypt. Lock your doors tonight. Subscribe, because the dead deserve to be remembered, and the living deserve to know the truth, and we will keep telling it until someone finally listens.